Hello and welcome to the Ori Spotlight Podcast. We are lucky to have Jim Faulkner with us today. Jim is a very experienced cell and gene therapy executive who's worn lots of hats in the industry, which I'll ask him to tell us more about during the course of the next hour or so. But just wanted to say thank you and welcome to Jim.
Thank you, Jason. Pleasure to be here.
If you don't mind diving right in with a little bit of your background, I know you've recently joined Ori's scientific advisory board, so thank you so much for becoming part of the broader Ori team. But wanted to look back a little bit at your history, both scientific and in the industry in cell and gene. So if you could just give us kind of a view of how you got to where you are today, that would be a great starting point.
Yeah, it's been a kind of a winding road, but a fun adventure. I did my PhD in molecular biology in yeast when yeast was a thing. I guess my career proper started when I joined British Biotech in Oxford. It was my first industry job after doing a couple of postdocs. That taught me so much, actually, very early in my career, because it taught me about biotech. It taught me about what was good and what was challenging. You know, British Biotech, when I was there, was a rise and a fall. You know, it rose very quickly. It was very exciting. Everybody thought it was going to be the next, major pharmaceutical company. And of course, that isn't how it went. And
yes,
the roof kind of metaphorically fell in. And so that was a very great start to my career in biotech. I moved on to Big Pharma. I joined what was then GlaxoSmithKline, became GlaxoSmithKline. And I spent a long time there. And I got a really good foundation in biopharmaceutical development, mostly proteins, but also DNA vaccines, some viral vaccines. I ended my time there in rare diseases. I was head of manufacturing and supply for the rare disease unit. But I did realize that GSK was not the right place for me to pursue cell and gene therapy, frankly. And that's no disrespect to them as a company, but it's a big pharma, and you really need to have that specialized and focused environment, I think, to really effectively deliver cell and gene therapy. And I was approached by Syncona, the investment house, to join a startup which became known as Autolus, spun out of University College London. And I really didn't think too hard about it. In retrospect, it was quite a risky move, but I didn't see it like that. It's what I wanted to do. I was excited by it. And I was one of the first senior employees at Autolus, so very much a blank sheet of paper. And I remember that, first few weeks of just, wow, I was used to having this kind of regime of meetings and committees and stuff at GSK. And suddenly it was like, wow, we've actually got to do real stuff here.
What year was this about?
This was about 2015. And it was exhilarating, really, to have that freedom to build a team, build a process, work with people through Autolus. And in this podcast, we'll talk more about what those experiences taught me. And it was a lot. And we took that company from the day that I joined. It was 3 years before we IPO'd, which was very, very quick. We were already over 200 people at that point, and it was a real ride and very exciting. I guess after 4 or 5 years, it stopped being the company that I joined. It just had, and I wasn't enjoying it as much. And I really wanted to go back to the startup. That's where I really enjoyed what I was doing. I was approached by a guy called Mike Ehlers, who just left being head of R&D at Biogen and joined a venture firm called Apple Tree Partners, to come and join him on a startup gene therapy company in Boston, Massachusetts. The role evolved from a single company to actually becoming part of Apple Tree Partners and joining there as a venture partner and helping them not just with that company, Ascidian Therapeutics, to which I still help them with, but also becoming a part of their venture board, venture firm, and helping them across both their existing portfolio and future portfolio. And I did that until 2 months ago. Unfortunately, Apple Tree withdrew from the UK, closed their office, and I'm now an independent consultant, and I'm very happy to help startups and venture firms in the cell and gene therapy field. So that's been my sort of potted history of me.
Excellent. No, tons of things to delve into a bit further there, but going from how many years were you at GSK?
I was 15 years at GSK in a
Okay.
variety of roles. Yeah.
Yeah, 15 years at GSK, then Autolus is a startup, then another set of startups. It's an
Yeah.
interesting transition.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, if you go greater than 10 years in big pharma, you're sort of institutionalized and you
Yes. Yeah.
no
No,
longer go anywhere else. So
it
it's
can feel
interesting that
that
you
way.
made the leap. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. Well, let's cover more of that in a minute for sure. And, you've obviously been involved intimately in cell and gene for a very long time now, and seen it through its development. It's, as people joke, it's a 30-year overnight success that's taken 30 years to get there. There's a lot of talk in the industry, as you know, about some of the challenges that the first cell therapies and gene therapies have faced in really achieving patient access. We have incredibly efficacious medicines, as you mentioned, Strimvelis, which has a great ability to cure a very significant rare disease. But it's had it's had a few owners, haven't it? It's gone from,
Yeah.
it
Absolutely.
ended up with Orchard, didn't it? And then sort of has
Yeah.
gone
And
beyond that as well now.
exactly. It's a story in itself of which rather sums up some of those challenges. Yeah. GSK, yeah, decided that it wasn't viable for them. They sold it on to Orchard. Orchard, I'm not sure about this fact, but I'm not sure whether they're still marketing Strimvelis. I think they may have moved that on.
Yeah, I'm not sure they
Yeah.
are anymore.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of question around commercial viability not only faces, what are tending to be very expensive gene therapies, but also, this first generation of cell therapies that exist, mostly targeted towards hematological tumors, as you know. We've seen incredible data that has been unparalleled. You look at the Carvykti data in multiple myeloma, 90+% complete response rates, just numbers that are just unheard of. And, I'm curious, in your view, looking today in late 2023, what is your perspective on, kind of where the industry is focused to try and solve some of these challenges? What are the most significant challenges that remain from your perspective, really as it relates to patient access? Because I think ultimately that's the only measuring stick that really matters, is how many patients get successfully treated. We measure a lot of other things. We measure, IND submissions and first patient dosed in a clinical trial, and $100 million Series A's are things we tend to celebrate. But at the end of the day, those of us in the industry are all concerned with how do we make sure that patients have the benefit. And up until now, we've struggled tremendously to get these products to patients at scale. The numbers that we have put together suggest that we've treated less than 3% of the available patient population with the first generation CAR T products. So in total, it's like 25,000 patients over 7 years. But if you look, within the year 2022, we treated a little less than 7,000 patients across a set of indications that have, 40, 50, 60, 70,000 patients that could have been treated. So I wonder, it's a long way of asking the question to say, what are the big challenges that are still facing the industry as you sit from your seat as a formerly down in the trenches and then an investor? I'm curious what that perspective has brought to you.
Yeah, there's kind of two dimensions here. I mean, there's what I think probably the focus of the question is, which is around commercialization and around what things that haven't really changed from the beginning around both price and around scalability. Those are two challenges that still remain. But also, I think that there's another dimension, which is the ability to get those products to market. There's that clinical journey, and I think that in my career, I've been mostly involved in that. I haven't ever sold a cell and gene therapy product. Mm-hmm. It's been around that development and what are the barriers to development of these products. And I think that certainly the cost to get to phase 1, and that's around the CMC costs primarily. Mm-hmm. Some non-clinical stuff's expensive because of primate work that's required, but it's primarily the big ticket is the CMC costs. So just a lot of cell and gene therapies don't get off the ground at all because they don't get the funding to get to that point. So we don't even get to the discussion around commercial price. Yeah. So there's the challenge of actually getting to clinic, and then I guess the price and economics are a bit of a vicious circle because cell and gene is still stuck a little bit in the rare disease niche. Small numbers demand high prices. Otherwise, there is no return on investment. And so therefore, we live unfortunately, in a capitalist world that demands a return on investment. Otherwise, things don't get off the ground. And so I think whilst cell and gene remains, within this niche, it's going to be hard for it to break that cycle. And I think that it will eventually. I think the technical challenges are solvable. I think that the companies like Ori are moving that dial pretty quickly when you compare it to other innovations in the past in terms of our ability to scale. I think, if someone said there's 100,000 patients to be treated, it could be done. It could be done with the will and with the investment, with the technologies that we have today, let alone what are being developed tomorrow.
Yeah, no, it is a multifaceted challenge for sure. You mentioned, pharma development is a for-profit endeavor, and it actually triggered a thought. I think, if I remember correctly, what happened to Strimvelis is Orchard partnered with a nonprofit to make it available. I think, if I remember correctly, I have to go back and look. But
that certainly isn't economic. There are a very small number of patients, and it's extremely difficult to produce. So
exactly. So these kind of public-private partnerships may be what we see moving forward for some of these more niche indications. But more broadly, I mean, obviously, we're treating things like multiple myeloma, which has 40,000 refractory patients a year. ALL, DLBCL, some of these are 10, 15, 20,000, and then of course we're studying CAR T and other interventions in almost every imaginable cancer and even chronic disease like cardiovascular disease. So these are massive challenges that we have to overcome.
Yeah, and it's getting there. I think we're seeing autoimmune diseases. We're starting to see CAR T type approaches nibbling at that, and I think that we'll see other diseases like fibrosis and so on also being addressed in that with cell and gene. So I think the future is going to be in non-rare disease for sure. And then you think about what are we going to have to do in order to get there, and technically, and I think some of the stuff around parallel processing of multiple samples. When I started at Autolus, we couldn't do that. We had to do one patient in a clean room, and we're well beyond that. Close processing has really enabled that. The automation is getting better incrementally all the time. The testing regimens are getting smarter. But I think what we really will eventually see is, I look back at other innovative technologies, whether it be videotape in the 80s or computers in the 90s. There was a plethora of different approaches that began, right? For the students of Betamax and VHS, I'm probably showing my age here. Eventually, the industry has to coalesce around a small number of platforms. We've seen it in MABs, there is a MAB platform process. Nobody doesn't do protein A as a first step. You'd be crazy to try and reinvent that. And we're seeing that in AAV, in gene therapy. These affinity resins and stuff are there's a platform process that you could pretty broadly point to that all the CDMOs are coalescing around. And I think that we're going to see that again. There are quite a few different platforms, but I think there's going to be an attrition in that. And I think you're going to see a coalescence and standardization around certain things.
Yeah, I think you're the second recent guest to mention standards to me. And there really aren't any, unfortunately, yet in the cell and gene therapy industry. And we need them. Everyone reinventing the wheel every time and starting out from scratch is not serving us well. It's wasting a lot of resources.
That drives the cost, you see. Whereas if you're a developer and you could rock up at a CDMO and said, this is how you do it, right? And there isn't a huge amount of choice. This is the platform. Everybody can fit into that. And then regulators can compare apples with apples and so on. And I just think it will drive efficiencies in the industry.
Agreed. I mean, you mentioned Autolus, the company you joined very early on and were at for several years. My understanding is they're expecting an approval, hopefully in 2024, for their first product.
They've submitted their BLA, and fingers crossed that it works out. I certainly hope so for the team now.
Indeed. It's been a bit of a long road for them, but I'm excited to have them hit the market with, I believe it's a CD19 CAR T product targeted towards ALL. Is that right?
That's correct. That? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, having been on the ground and been the one facing these challenges firsthand, I'm curious about that historical reference point, what Autolus went through back at that point. It has taken, I don't know, when did you say you joined? 2015. So now we're looking at 8 or 9 years here.
That's a good point. I mean, it's 10 years really from the start of the company to the point that they hopefully will gain an approval. Now, I think they've done pretty well. But I also think that, as an investor, I see a lot of early stage companies saying, oh, we'll do it in 3, we'll do it in 5. And I think, truthfully, when we were at Autolus, when we were doing that pitch back in 2015 and so on, I think we thought we would.
You maybe said the same thing.
Yeah. But, so a bit of brutal realism about, the amount of hard yards that need to be done in order to get a therapy all the way. It's quite a good case history.
Yeah. And can you describe somewhat, of course, no proprietary details are being asked for, but just generally, like what are really the key when you're on the ground as the CTO or CMO of a, cell therapy company? What are the kinds of things that you're thinking about? Because I recently wrote an article with Sanjay Srivastava from Accenture. You might know Sanjay. Really about the new economics of advanced therapies, where you grew up in biologics and started there. We've built a model around small molecules and biologics that's worked for 30 or 40 years. It's you race to the clinic, you get clinical data, you prove that you have something, a target, a molecule that works, and then oftentimes a partnership or a buyout from big pharma is the next step at phase 2 once you get sort of data that looks reasonable. And that model has worked quite well. It's really about the scientific data and the clinical data. And if you can get that, that's the major piece that people are looking for in those modalities. And we've used that same blueprint for advanced therapies and have unfortunately learned the hard way that's not all that we need. We need to have you mentioned viability. Like we need to have a credible path to commercial viability and launch and, market access and reimbursement to make this go, because we can't assume that that's going to happen like we did back for small molecules or biologics. So, when you're in that role, are you feeling torn, as a senior leader in a small biotech company by, I know I'd have to deliver the scientific and clinical data, but to fix my manufacturing process, I've got to slow down a bit and kind of think through, how does that work, and how do those conversations with investors work around the board table?
Oh, I mean, Jason, you kind of hinted at it. I mean, the tensions, if you like, in the different directions and the different stakeholders you have to manage are, stressful. Because you're quite right. There are multiple different stakeholders who want slightly different things. But everybody wants it fast and everybody wants it now. And it's you have to manage that. And I think that when I look back at my time, the challenge, is that you're not doing your process development and so on in a vacuum. You are under a great deal of pressure to deliver what is needed to keep the company moving forward, and that is clinical data. And once you've begun to get on that train of enrolling patients and generating data, and don't forget, these are open label studies. So the data is rolling in real time. It's not a case of 2 years of blind study and then turn the cards over at the end and see what happens. You're seeing it emerge. And so you're seeing some patients respond. You're seeing some patients not respond so well. You're seeing all the different analytics arriving at different points. Some takes longer than others. And so there's this tremendous constant iteration of, right, do we need to move this? Do we need to tweak that? can we change the process? Can we not change the process? Should we just lock it now because we're on a roll and we have to? We don't want to start putting regulatory risk into the process. So there are all sorts of real-time conversations pulling you in different directions. And as the CTO, CMO, you have to try and help navigate that. And at the same time, have investors who are wanting to just pour petrol on the fire, if you like, and just say, this is looking great. Can we do more? Can we do more? And the fact is that throughput of patient is quite limited in the early days in particular, both for scalability, but also for regulatory reasons. The regulators are not going to want you to crank off, 20 patients in parallel. You have to do them in serial and see outcomes and so on. Yeah, there's a real bottleneck, if you like, at that stage, and a lot of those pressures fall on the CMC team.
And it's one of those things, and in the article that I was mentioning, we really call on investors to sort of take a step back and look, because new investors are going to ask this question, right? They're going to ask, how are you going to get this product to market? What indications are you going after? What line coverage do you expect? What's the size of that indication? How do you expect to manufacture for that many patients? They're asking all of these questions. But your existing investor base needs to also be open to, if someone like yourself, who's the CTO or CMO, comes in and says, I need an extra 6 months to shore up these pieces of the process to make sure that it's scalable and it's not going to fall apart when we try and go from 10 patients a year to 100 to 1,000. And so getting investors on board to understand that, this new paradigm applies is important. Otherwise, you as a chief or an executive in a biotech company is being pulled in two totally different directions. And what we tend to see, unfortunately, is that the scientific and clinical led model wins. It's like everyone knows that that's sort of what we have to do. This other thing seems like it's a nice to have, but it's not until we get to phase 3 and we try and launch a product and we can only produce 4 a year and their cost of goods are way too high, that we say, oh shoot, we might have made a mistake 4 or 5 years ago by not taking the time to do that. So in your investor, wearing your investor hat, do you see those sorts of conversations happening amongst investors? Do you see investors getting a greater level of sensitivity to this? And, are they then trying to incentivize or counsel their portfolio companies to think differently about manufacturing earlier in R&D?
I think definitely the intelligent investors definitely are much more savvy about this. And I think back, if I go back again to Autolus, when we were doing our Series B, I remember there was the pitch, obviously, like any small biotech, you practice this pitch, and CEO, the founder, the CSO, and everyone was doing their thing. As the sort of manufacturing lead, I didn't have much to say. Slide 45, manufacturing, right?
One slide, 6 bullets.
And really, I was supposed to kind of sit at the back and look confident. That was it wasn't really a great deal of discussion at that stage. And yet very quickly, the industry began to learn that CMC was a big deal for cell and gene. And so by the time we got to our IPO, I remember, the first kind of, we were going to, have the pitch that you go around all your investors with. And I was sort of sitting in the room as the CEO began to describe what we were going to do, and getting a cup of coffee, thinking, I'm not going to be around. don't have to think too much until slide 35 or 40. And it's like bang up top, CMC, Jim, this is where you come in. It's like, what? We're only on slide 3, we're only on slide 4. And it was like, yeah. I remember that was like realization how things had changed, not just for us, but for the industry, that this was very much top of the agenda. And my role at Appletree is a direct sort of straight line from that, because I remember when Seth Harrison, who's the managing partner there, talked to me about joining Appletree. And becoming a venture partner, I was very honest with him. I said, Seth, I don't really know a huge amount about the mechanics of setting up companies. If you asked me to describe the difference between sort of preference shares and ordinary shares, I'd stumble around a bit.
Yeah.
And I remember what he said to me. I'll paraphrase it a bit, but he basically said, Jim, we have a lot of smart lawyers and we have some really diligent associates. They do all that stuff. What we need is people who understand risk, who understand how to evaluate both the science, but most of all the pragmatism of turning that science into therapeutics and reality. So that's what we're looking for. And I said, I can do that bit. And very much that was my role at Appletree, was to try and make sure that it's a lot of cool science out there, Jason, in all sorts of fields, but notably in cell and gene.
Yes.
But what investors really need to know is, how do you actually make this happen? And that's something that I think over my career I've learned the hard way, that how do you actually turn these dreams into reality? How do you enable that scientific vision into a therapeutic product?
Yeah, absolutely. And one that's accessible to patients, for sure. Ultimately the end game. So what would you, if you had your time machine and you went back to see young Jim back in 2015 or 16, I had the question framed as, what do you feel that developers should be doing now? So earlier in the development cycle to help set themselves up for commercial success. So all those things that you're focused on, getting the clinical endpoints, getting into the clinical trial, safety, efficacy, what other things should they be focused on to ensure that ultimately the outcome is achieved, where an ROI can be delivered, patients can be treated, the product can be accessed?
Somebody once said something to me that really stuck in my mind, and that was, the only thing worse than failure is unaffordable success. And I think that is so true, that, you can try and fail if testing a scientific hypothesis, sometimes you don't get it right. And that's the business, and that's fine. That's part of what we do. But actually, to go into an endeavor, create something that offers someone hope in a situation that is threatening their lives or someone that they love, and then to say to them, but you know what, you can't have it because you can't afford it, because we didn't think about that at the beginning. That's unforgivable, really. And it's a pretty poor investment as well, actually, just from that perspective too. So I think that getting that thought process in up top and ensuring that what you're doing has an outcome that is going to meet the needs of patients and investors is absolutely critical. And you may as well have that discussion up front rather than at the end.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, to your point, the worst outcome for all parties involved is investing the full, hundreds of millions, $1 billion in 10 years to get a product that's very clinically effective, but that no one can access. No. And that is the worst case of all. You'd almost rather it fail in the clinic.
Yeah.
And we've seen examples of very clinically effective products, Bluebird's suite of products, Skysona and Zynteglo most recently, but seven out of something like 28 products that have been launched in Europe in the gene therapy space have been withdrawn for commercial reasons. Not for clinical or safety reasons, but because, they really just, the economics didn't work.
That's right. It's not.
And so we need to, none of us want to continue to see those outcomes. I mean, all of us realize that is a terrible outcome for patients, is a terrible outcome for investors and for companies. And so that's, part of the reason why I think people who've lived it like yourself can be so valuable to those early biotech management teams to really think this issue through. And, one of our partners is Achilles Therapeutics here in the UK. Ed Samuel's been there for the whole time I've known that company, 5 or 6 years. Ahead of manufacturing, when there was 5 or 6 people knocking around the place. But he was there very early. They were thinking about, how are we going to make these? This is not going to be an easy product to make. We need to make sure that we're thinking about this at the very beginning and thinking about, I was joking in a conversation earlier today about, I grew up in small molecules, and, if you have a TPP, a target product profile, you would never really see a cost of goods target in there, because I'm making small molecules. I'm stamping out tablets. It doesn't really, going to cost, 0.3 of a P or 0.2 of a P. It doesn't really matter. But that's not the world we're in anymore. We need to have a product profile that includes, accessibility, affordability. Here's our target cost of goods. Here's our target throughput per year. Here's how we're going to make these things. And that's really where we hope that a platform like Ori's will make a difference, because we will be flexible enough to use in the lab, in the UCLs and the academic centers out there developing the next wave of products. You can do it on the system, and you can decide, okay, I've got the flexibility I need to play around and figure out what's going to work. And if I can get it to work, then I know I've got a seamless path to scalability. It'll take me into the clinic and it'll take me to commercial scale, rather than having to develop it on, in a flask and a bag and a micropipette, and then hope we can fix it down the line, which seems to be, unfortunately, where still a lot of companies' heads are at.
Yeah. No, I was proud to say that the basic platform and process that we treated our first patient with at Autolus is the one that's gone into the license submission. So, it's not changed fundamentally from that.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how the market dynamics play out with another entrant into the ALL space, and how all that happens. So, when in your time at Appletree, and that was, you said, almost 3 years that you were there.
Yeah, at least, yeah. 3 years, yeah.
And that was mostly focused on therapeutics company investments. Is that what you were?
Exclusively, yeah.
Exclusively. And so, the work of some of that work that you had done over the past several years, how are those companies finding it? Are you still involved? I know Acidian, you said you're still involved with.
Yeah, I still support Acidian. That's the only Appletree company that I'm formally continuing to support. Yeah, I think it's a tough time for biotech out there in general.
Yeah.
And so everybody is having to think about everything,
rethink everything. Exactly.
Yeah,
you thought you knew.
And it's fairly brutal. Some companies, you have to, read Fierce Biotech or whatever every day. And there's a company going down pretty much every day. That's the brutal reality of it. I think Appletree, I think, is a pretty intelligent science-led investor, and it's investing very early stage in really pioneering science. Some of those things are not going to succeed, and they accept that. And that's, you test a hypothesis, and you have to have the guts to know when that's not working too. That's just part of the industry that we're in. Yeah, I'm, as I say, working with Acidian Therapeutics at the moment. We are a gene therapy company, and just going through that initial build up to clinical trial. It's really exciting.
And are you seeing any move amongst the investor community to provide kind of a shared infrastructure to their portfolio companies? I think Deerfield has some labs that it has in Manhattan that it's trying to provide, that kind of physical infrastructure, or the technical infrastructure, the kind of automation systems or other things that, there seems to be economies of scale to be had there, assuming that that infrastructure is appropriate for, more than one portfolio company.
Exactly. And it's not betraying any confidentiality to say that, we had those conversations a lot at Appletree, and, looked at where we could do that. And there is such a thing as ATP labs. It's not doing the cell and gene stuff, actually. It's doing mostly small molecule stuff, but we did consider the cell and gene angle too. I think that certainly I can reflect some of the things that we discussed at ATP, and that was that we wanted to ensure that each portfolio company was empowered to make its own decisions. And that was a very strong perspective. And I agree with that. We didn't want to kind of have them sort of forced, if you like, to fit a certain model just because it fitted the sort of portfolio. It was like, we're going to set these companies up, their own management teams, and empower them to do what they want to do. And so that kind of overrode that idea of standardization, if you like, and saying every company is going to use this central facilities with these things. But I do see, that there are arguments to be had about certain central processes and capabilities that investors should think about. So I think that done intelligently and flexibly, I think it can work if you've got a large enough portfolio in those particular fields.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we called it infrastructure as a service, like this idea of being able to have shared resources. We know 4 or 5 years ago, pre-21, we would have seen lots of people investing in their own facilities and their own footprints and their own infrastructure. And that hasn't gone so well for most companies.
Yeah, I mean, at Autolus, we had to. There was no real other option at that time. There were no CDMOs, and you talked about the model of big pharma buying. You used to say, well, what are they going to do if they buy us? They don't have their own facility. They're going to have to use something that we're building. So that was very much the intention, to be in control of our own manufacturing and supply chain. That's not to say it wasn't easy. We jumped into Catapult as a kind of halfway house, if you like, and we had various. I mean, it's public record that there was a site in the US that was kind of started and then sold on, and they sort of rethought that strategy and relocated close to Catapult, which was actually not by chance, because that's where we built the team, and that was the fundamentals of it.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to watch the evolution of that thinking, and the constraints are not only financial, obviously the $50 or $100 million it takes to put a facility in the ground, but you have to be where the talent is, and then usually if you go where their talent is, there's other companies there competing for that talent. So how do you solve for that? And you need to be able to be more efficient in both the size, the footprint, the amount of investment required, and also the people, and just do more with automation, which hopefully we can help with at some point. Speaking of kind of advancements and innovations, our goal at Ori is really to close and automate the process in order to increase throughput, increase quality, and dramatically decrease costs in order to get, to enable widespread patient access. And part of that for us is digital, is the kind of introducing digital first approach. I've seen too many large binders, 1,000 pages of paper batch record at the end of a process. And you mentioned the Catapult. Stephen Ward from the Catapult has this terrible graph of the amount of QP resource that's required to release products that goes logarithmic or exponential if you start to get into the tens of thousands of doses. So I'm curious what role you think that technology should play in helping the industry unlock the next phase. I mean, I think, I'd put my hand up and say the enabling technology sector, so the kind of supportive technologies supporting biotech in the cell and gene therapy space, we just haven't done our job very well. We provided technologies that were often too inflexible, that really didn't meet the need of the industry, and we just haven't kept up with the pace of innovation. There's something like 2,500 clinical trials in cell and gene right now going on. There's lots of different, 8 or 10 or 12 different cell types that are being explored. But we're still using technology that's 20 years old, that's maybe started out in in the stem cell field. So what role do you think technology should play in the next chapter of cell and gene?
I think you mentioned data there, and I think that if there's one thing that defines our industrial age right now, it's data. Data is everything. You look at the biggest companies in the world; they're all data companies now, and so cell and gene's no different, and it needs to really push on that. So I think that Ori is very sensibly seeing that as a way to differentiate and to improve, because data is everything, and the more that you can learn about the complexity of both the patient and your product, the better that you're going to get, and the more efficient you're going to get, and therefore the cheaper you're going to get, and so on and so on. And you're quite right to look at some of the operational aspects of how you manufacture products. So we had this vision of what we wanted. Now, some of which we introduced, things like digital batch records. That's a reality now, and that can be done. But I wanted to go further than that, because you're quite right. The review period and the way in which traditional batch record review is done for each product is not sustainable at all. And I said, look, let's imagine a scenario where you need to, at the moment, the review needs to know that the operator is trained and that the equipment is calibrated and that the products have all met spec, the raw materials have all met spec, all the et cetera, and that's all part of the review. There's a billion different things to review to ensure that product is is ready to be released for clinical use or commercial use. I said, why don't we have a system that stops any operator, even if it walks up to a machine, there should be some automated kind of force field or something a little bit more normal, like a RFI or something, that automatically checks that trainer status, that automatically checks that machine status, that automatically ensures that all the materials being put on are tagged such a way that the operator cannot push the go button. It just won't work until everything is right. And therefore you don't get, because what holds you up in review are the exceptions, the things that have gone out of the deviations, things that have gone out of plan. If you can stop those happening by your automated approach, then you know that the review is going to be quick because it's already happened. You see what I mean? It's happened in advance before rather than after. Rather than it being a review, it's proactive. So this idea of proactive quality control is something I believe can be built into a system and a process and an equipment as well.
Yes, and that would be, and maybe in another phraseology, like the approach for continuous validation and ultimately leading to release by exception. So that ability to manage just the deviations. Exactly.
Yeah, just if you get rid of that possibility of making the mistake,
yeah,
then you can just release the product at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. And is there any, as you scan, do in your travels, as you horizon scan, are there particular technologies that you're getting excited about for 2024 and beyond? I know there's been a bunch of conversation recently with, it looks like the FDA doing their prudent job of risk assessment, looking at some secondary tumors for a very small percentage of CAR T patients that were, potentially tied to viral vector. I know transfection or electroporation or other types of genetic modification technology has been getting a lot of airtime, not only in the last few weeks, but in the last few years. Are there anything along those lines or anything else you're looking at that particularly has you excited?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment, I think that signal is small enough that it's not going to be sort of relevant to the current indications. But of course, as you start to move beyond those life-threatening acute indications into sort of more chronic stuff, then that is going to become much more of a and the numbers go up. But whether electroporation and so on solve all that, I don't know. There may be other aspects that we haven't seen yet, but certainly improving safety is always a key focus. I think in terms of what excites me, the stuff that I really enjoy looking at, I think other cell types. I'm a big fan of macrophages and myeloid therapies. I think they're going to be good. I think epigenetics, I'm seeing as a field, epigenetic editing and so on, really exciting, and the ability to sort of influence cells in different ways. RNA editing, transplicing, those types of things. There are just so many cool technologies out there that I think are going to be transformational.
Yeah, absolutely. One of our partners is in Inceptor Bio, and they've got a CAR macrophage or CAR monocyte program that they've elevated, which looks super interesting for solid tumors. So definitely a lot of interesting work happening on that front. I'm going to ask you to dust off your crystal ball, if you don't mind. You can just pull it out from under your desk there. And, if you can vision in the 5 to 10 years time frame from here, what does good look like for this industry? Where do you predict we'll be? I think Scott Gottlieb famously predicted we'd be approving, 15 to 20, I think it was, or 20 to 25 cell therapies every year by 2025. We're well short of that. But I wonder what your crystal ball is telling you about the industry and its direction of travel.
Almost reeling back to the beginning of our conversation, it's not just about the numbers of approvals. It's about the type of indications that I think are really going to be the change. And this idea that we need to see cell and gene therapy move out of its niche of rare diseases into more common diseases. And by that, I think at the moment, obviously the low-hanging fruit, if I can use that cliche, is around genetically defined disease. I think you need to start thinking about, we've seen CAR T go into hematologic malignancies, and that's been terrific. But I think the next leap is going to be into these non-genetically defined multifactorial diseases. So things like, can I see a world where we could treat Alzheimer's with a brain penetrating sort of macrophage that gobbles up amyloid? I do see that. I think that's possible. I can't technically, I'm not smart enough to work out how to do that. But do I think that that's the type of product that could be developed, that could suddenly be a huge blockbuster requiring a completely different thinking about how we supply and treat patients? Yeah, I do. I do think that's possible. So this idea of going after dysregulated pathways, whether it be autoimmune, whether it be fibrosis, chronic kidney disease. My gosh, you could imagine something that's going to go and eat up the dead tissue and repair at the same time. It's possible. Again, I don't know how, but it's the type of thing.
you'd be off starting your own company again if you knew the answer to that question. But no, I agree. I mean, I think it's a super. I really hope that. What I don't think we can afford is a series of additional commercial failures as an industry. We need to learn our lessons and implement them so that the next wave of products are more easily accessible. Maybe they're lower cost, maybe they're easier to make, maybe we can produce them in higher volumes. We've talked to, our friends at J&J have stated openly they have the ambition to produce 10,000 doses a year of Carvykti, and that's a step change from where they are certainly now. That would be more than the whole industry produced in all of this year. We're on target to treat about 9,000 patients this year in total across all the products. So I think the investment and the expertise of rethinking manufacturing, rethinking the supply chain, rethinking how we deliver and manufacture these products is happening. It's happening amongst a lot of the leaders that are in this space.
And I think that one thing I can see beyond sort of the innovation, I think the regulators are going to change. I think that at the moment, I've been involved in license submissions and INDs and so on, many of them. And there's sections around safety, obviously, and there's sections around your efficacy, and then there's sections around your CMC. And your CMC really is around how it supports that safety and efficacy argument. I can see a world where the regulators put in another section into that CMC section, which is around cost of goods, and start to say, we want a standardized, transparent description of your cost of goods and how your cost of goods are going to reduce over time. I can see that being part of your approval passes because of what we talked about of there's no point them approving stuff that is unaffordable. And they know that, we know that. And so I can see that being embedded somehow within the regulatory submission, that a commitment and a plan to drive that cost down will be part of the license. And it will be and if you don't do that, then your license is withdrawn. And I think that will push the industry even harder to address some of those challenges that we've talked about.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We know that there's no nice equivalent in the U.S., this kind of health economic assessment body. But Peter Marks, the head of CBER, said
exactly.
A month ago,
part of the actual BLA,
the regular, and Peter Marks said, really to increase accessibility for today's CAR T therapies, they have to be dramatically cheaper. That was his quote, dramatically cheaper, and it's just a realistic point of view. We just know that to be the case. And my position is when we have this discussion around price, which is always a hard discussion to have, and say that's really not Ori's role. Ori's role is to make these products as cost effectively as possible and as high a volume as possible, and then let the market take control of there's other people much more qualified than I to make these decisions on pricing. But ultimately, if we enable more products to hit the market more quickly at higher volumes that are, higher quality, then the competition will take care of pricing and increase accessibility. And we have to make sure that we're doing that. Otherwise we get, products that are approvable from a regulatory perspective, but aren't accessible or affordable, which doesn't help anyone. Well, Jim, thanks so much. It's been a fantastic 45 minutes or so. We've been able to chat, and I want to just leave you with one question, maybe. I'm not sure. I always joke. I'm not sure if we have any kind of university students or secondary students listening to the podcast. Probably not. But I'd be curious what advice you'd give people that are or companies working in the industry, interested in getting into the industry, about cell and gene in general. What words of wisdom would you leave them with as we end the podcast?
Yeah, I can only go on my own experiences, and what stands out for me is like, be prepared for change. It's an environment where you need to continuously adapt. You need to continuously adapt your thinking, continuously adapt the way that you're going to approach problems. But it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for continuous learning. And I really enjoy that. I'm sort of at the later stages of my career now. But I feel, I'm still learning stuff, and I really relish that. And I almost say to people, if you're not learning, then don't, do something else, because that's what you want to do. You want to continue, that growth is something that motivates me, and I think it motivates most people. But what I say, take it all in, enjoy the ride. It's good fun. It's a great industry to work in. It feels meaningful. It feels scientifically challenging. It can be very rewarding.
Yeah, no, keep your growth mindset. And Carol Dweck, as you know, wrote a great book about that. And I joined the cell and gene therapy industry only 5 years ago or so, after a lifetime, it feels like, in small molecules. So every day is a school day for me, learning from people like yourself and Farland and Chris, the founders of Ori and others. But just wanted to reiterate our appreciation for you joining us today and for becoming a member of the Ori Strategic Advisory Board and also the broader Ori team. Thank you very much, and great to see you. Hope to see you in 3 dimensions sometime soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jason. I really enjoyed it.